Hello, today we are going to be looking at the themes that we see in chapters 5 through 22, or if you're reading the paperback copy of Salt of the Sea, for me it's pages 9 through 52. And one of the things that the author does, at least in my copy, the chapters are numbered. So if you are doing this on your own and you have a library copy, you might want to take sticky notes or something that you can put in there and not damage the book and have your chapter numbers in there, because it will make following along a lot easier. If you're using a paperback edition, then it should be pages 9 through 52. So the first thing that we look at is willpower and fate. And probably fate is what we're definitely looking at through here. So we're learning more about our characters here, right? If we look at starting, let me go back to page 9 for myself, chapter 5, Florian, right? Florian is Prussian. So Prussia is Otto von Wilhelm. Prussia is the nation that we see that drives Germany to unite back in the 1850s. But Prussian culture is, even though it's German speaking, is still a different culture than central Germany. Different lands, different people, different customs, same language, right? And so we have Florian, who is going to have that background of being Prussian. That is his fate. But his fate is also that he's living in the time of Nazi Germany, right? And so we look back and we see that he grabs the gun, right? And we see that he kills somebody who's coming into this root cellar, potato cellar, with Amelia. We find out the soldier is killed, right? And killed the Russian soldier. So we know at this point in history, the Soviet Union is advancing into Western Germany. They're trying to push the Nazi Germany back to Berlin to push for surrender. This is the winter of 45 again, right? So he's killed a Russian soldier. That makes sense because the Soviets were killing and doing a lot of damage to not just the other army, but the civilians. And we're going to talk more about the civilians and the casualties that we see during this time. And so also fate, we learned that Amelia is Polish. That's her fate, right? We don't know what her religion is, but it doesn't matter because she was born in Poland. She is a Polish. And so being Polish means that she is less than. In the eyes of Nazi Germany, she is less than. And she knows if this man has killed this Russian soldier and he is German, then in his eyes, she must be less than, right? And it says that Hitler declared Polish people were subhuman. We were to be destroyed. We were not, right, Germanizable, but our soil was. And so we see that Amelia's fate is where she is born. And fate is also going to, because she's born into a time of war, that's also going to really be her story. Her story is based on the fate. And then we have Joanna, right, as we go into chapter 7, who is Lithuanian. So that is her fate. And in this time of war, in this region of Europe that we're looking at, your fate depends so much on where you are born, who your parents are, what is your family history, your ancestry. We also meet Ingrid, who is a blind girl. We don't know the story of how she came to be blind, but that is her fate, right? And then we read about that. We meet the poet, right? We don't really know much about his fate, although we do know that he is also moving westward like everybody else in this story. As we go back with Joanna, she flees. Her family flees Lithuania, right? Because of the invading army. So Lithuania is going to be right in that line where the Soviets are coming in, and then at one point the Nazis are coming into Lithuania. So Lithuania is going to be basically, a midpoint stop for the different armies. So it's going to be a terrible place to be, right? And then we learn more about the story actually as we read with Joanna, talking about the refugees trekking toward freedom. That's where they're going, right? How what kind of freedom? What freedom are we looking at for a German, a Lithuanian, or Polish person, or Prussian German, right? Um, and then we hear about the planes, right? Florian, again, we do learn that his willpower, right? Willpower is you get to choose which side of a war you want to be on. You might not to get to choose your role during that job, sort of like Joanna becoming a nurse. You might not have really chosen that role. It might have been thrust upon her. But Florian has the willpower, and he talks about Hitler's ideas, but then he says Hitler was a coward. That had been one thing Father and I agreed upon. So that is his willpower that he's choosing there. That's not fate. That's a choice that he's making. And he's going against Hitler. He's going against the Nazi government, which would definitely be a death sentence. And we don't know much more about that at this point. And then we also get into a lot of memory, right? Joanna thinks back on her family. Florian thinks back on his sister. He thinks back on his father. All right. Then there's Alfred, right? Alfred doesn't have a lot of memory that he goes back to, but there's definitely a lot of storytelling and fantasy with Alfred, right? And so whenever we're reading anything that's in italics with Alfred, he's writing a letter in his mind. Why, yes, Hannelore, the uniform, it suits me quite well. If time allowed, I would have a photograph made for your bedside table, but alas, leisure time proves scarce here for valiant men. On the topic of heroism, it seems I will soon be promoted. Oh, certainly, darling, you can tell everyone in the neighborhood. So Alfred, right, look at what Alfred is thinking and writing in his mind, that letter that he's telling the story to Hannelore. And then look at the sentence right above it. What are you waiting for, Frick? Get out of here, you pathetic slug. Look at the contrast to what the reality is for Alfred and what Alfred is thinking of in his mind. And so that's something that we're constantly going to see back and forth in this story. And then as we get to survival, look at Amelia, right? How is she surviving the war? What is she going through? What has she gone through? And that's going to become a key part that we learn about in this one, right? And so Joanna in chapter 11 tells about survival, right? With Joanna, if you notice, we get a lot of the facts of the story. All right. So with Joanna, we don't see a lot of fairy tale. We don't see a lot of storytelling. We see more the facts that Joanna is keeping us straight, right? Like she's going to be on what we need to be doing. Okay. And it tells us about the invasion that Germany did to Russia and what happened. And now Stalin was destroying the people of Poland, Ukraine, and the Baltics. Brutality was shocking. Right. And then so Joanna, as we're reading the story, she's going to be one who's sort of keeping us on track. She's giving a little bit of the background to the story as we keep reading. Right. And Florian, we get more action, if you noticed, as we're reading about Florian. Right. And I notice Amelia is constantly giving people food, right? She is offering them food. How is that part of her survival? Right? That's constantly. There's also Amelia talking a lot about this night. And we're going to get to that. This is actually part of a Polish legend, and I'll talk a little bit more about that separately. All right. And so once people start to realize that she is Polish, right, and they talk about Nemmerstoff. And so Nemmerstoff is a terrible memory as you look at it. Anytime anyone mentions that, it's a very harsh memory for anyone in the book, whether Eva's talking about it or Joanna or Florian. Amelia doesn't talk about it directly, but there's mention of it as we're talking. Florian mentions about Amelia, we can't bring this girl with us. Her coat is splattered with blood. She clearly is in trouble, and she's Polish. Knowing that the Poles are going to be disregarded by both the Soviets and the Germans. So someone of Polish ancestry, Germans are not going to allow freedom to. They're not going to allow in as a refugee. And then Joanna says, I'm Lithuanian. Are you going to toss me out too? She was so tired of hearing the phrase German only. Right. And so again, she goes back to this story of surviving. And if you see with Joanna, we see the idea of community. She wants to help everybody. When you're talking with Joanna, lots of times there's other people involved in those chapters, as compared to Amelia or Florian, where lots of times there's one other person or no other people. And the same thing with Alfred, right? We see with Alfred, he's often talking in his own mind and observing what's going on, but he's not very often interacting in a very close way with other people in a sense of community. And so just note that as you read these characters and start to, with your character charts that you started last week, this is a time you want to go back and start to fill in a little bit more details about your characters, because this is going to help you understand them moving forward. I would say that last week and this week is when you're going to spend the most time trying to figure out who's who and what is their role in the story. And then once we start going forward, you'll just start thinking of them. Oh, that's Florian. That's Joanna. Right now, you're still trying to form an identity and an image of who these people are. Feel free to draw your own pictures. Again, those character references are a great way to help yourself to figure out what you need to say. When I think of Florian, I need to think of this. When I think of Amelia, this is the image that I think of. And also, we're going to talk a little bit about the symbols that we see in the story. So we're not getting too many symbols, although the shoes come up. We meet the poet who talks about the shoes, so focus on that. What is he telling us about the shoes? He gives us some more information about Joanna when he tells us about her shoes and a few other characters in the story. We also, on page 36 and chapter 16, the end of it, Amelia says, I heard a noise and I looked up. That's when I saw it. Perched on top of the barn was the largest nest I have ever seen. So we don't know yet what kind of nest this is, but this is one of the symbols that we're going to look at through the story. I'm not going to talk much about Alfred because he pretty much tells you what you need to know about him. All right. Let's see what else we need here. Okay, Dr. Lang and Koch, focus on them, and this is with Florian, chapter 19. Who are those two people? Because they're, again, going to become part of helping to understand the story later on. We never meet these people, but we need to know who they are and who we associate with them. Okay? And then, let's see what else we got here. I think that's it. Think about Alfred. Think about the turning point that the author chooses on page 52, chapter 22, the very final part of 22, right? And this is going to be storytelling as a craft. So I want to think of this as not storytelling like fantasy, but how the writer is telling the story, right? And so we have two different things going on here. We have somebody speaking. We have Alfred speaking, and he says, certainly not. I balanced a stack of blue life jackets and peeked out from the side. Where am I taking these? Right? So you can imagine he's got a German sailor or soldier, and he's got these life jackets, and he's got them all stacked up, and he's like, where do I take these? The officer pointed to an enormous slate gray ship that matched the menacing sky. First of all, notice the alliteration there. It matched the menacing sky, right? So, and slate gray ship. So we have those M's and we have the S's in there, right? That's helping us to say, this is a sentence you want to pay attention to. Focus here. Slow down as you're reading the sentence. That one, he said. The Wilhelm Gustloff. Key sentence here. This tells us the whole story. The author is foreshadowing what's going to happen to the people that we're reading about. Because we're going to talk more in a different video about the Wilhelm Gustloff and how that is foreshadowing. All right, so that's it for this week. So just, again, we're adding to who these people are. What is the purpose for each person in this journey? Why are we seeing them in this cold barn? What's going on? Where are they walking to? Who are they running from? Where are they running to? Or trudging to, journeying to. And so the writer does a very good job of giving us breadcrumbs to tell the story. And then by the time we're reading into next week, we're going to be into the story. But first we have to develop the characters, because that's going to help explain how people act and how people respond as we go forward. So, willpower, fate, memory, survival. And that's what everyone's in there for, right? Everyone's trying to survive.